Background. In the heart of a dense jungle stood a lonely outpost, perched high on a rugged hill. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a rough structure of stones and wood. But in truth, it was the most vital stronghold along the border. From this height, one could observe enemy movements for miles. By day, sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting broken patterns across the ground, while at night the moonlight turned the silence of the hilltop into something almost haunting. A lone sniper was stationed there. His duty was simple yet unforgiving: to watch, to wait, and to be ready for the enemy at any moment. The silence around the post was so heavy it felt as though time itself had frozen. But beneath that silence hid a constant tension, the fear that the enemy could emerge like a shadow at any second. When night descended, the outpost transformed into a stage of eerie suspense. The wind would cut through the trees, creating a sinister rustling sound. At times, the shrill cry of a fox, the hoot of an owl, or the crunch of dry leaves beneath some unseen creature's feet would pierce the air. To the sniper, every sound carried meaning, every echo could be a threat. Sometimes it felt as though unseen eyes were watching from the bushes, waiting to strike. Inside the post sat an old, battered radio, his only link to the outside world. Yet during storms or heavy rain, even that faint lifeline would fade into static, leaving him in complete isolation. On those nights, he felt cut off from everything, standing as the last sentinel in a forgotten corner of war. This outpost was more than just a defensive position. It was a battlefield of nerves. Every passing second carried the weight of death. And in that fragile silence stood one lone sniper, guarding his homeland with steady eyes, knowing that the next heartbeat could be his very last. Character. He was no ordinary soldier. In his eyes lived a silence carved from years of training, and in his breath lingered the stillness of men who had looked death in the face and refused to flinch. His unit called him the Shadow, because he moved so quietly, so invisibly, that the enemy never realized he was there until it was too late. The sniper rarely spoke, never boasted. His life was not about glory, but about duty. He knew that one bullet, fired at the right time, could turn the tide of battle. He also knew that one moment of hesitation could cost his comrades their lives. That knowledge weighed on him constantly, sharpening his focus, hardening his resolve. His rifle was not just a weapon. It was an extension of himself. Every scratch on the stock, every groove in the barrel, every click of the bolt was etched into his memory. He could take it apart blindfolded and put it back together in seconds. When he looked through the scope, the world slowed. His heartbeat quieted, his breathing steadied, and the trigger beneath his finger felt like the line between life and death. For his enemy, there was no escape. His bullet always reached first. But the true climax of his character was his solitude. At that lonely outpost, he stood alone. No comrades, no voices, no comfort. Only his courage and the flag in his heart. Against the enemy's roar, he was silence. And yet, that silence was his greatest strength. He knew that holding this position meant walking the thin edge between survival and sacrifice. Still, he made a vow in his heart. If the enemy came, he would break their will one bullet at a time, even if it cost him his last breath. That unshakable resolve was what transformed him from a soldier into a legend.
Setting. It was night, the kind of night where darkness pressed down like a living weight, swallowing everything in silence. The outpost perched high above the jungle was barely visible against the storm-heavy sky. Clouds rolled over the moon, and every so often a flash of lightning tore through the heavens, flooding the trees in a pale, violent glow. For an instant, the shadows of twisted branches looked like enemy soldiers creeping closer. Private Daniel Cross lay still behind his rifle. The silence was not comforting, it was suffocating. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, loud enough to feel dangerous. Every sound carried meaning now. A faint crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, the whisper of movement far in the dark. Was it the enemy, or just the forest playing its cruel tricks? He couldn't be sure. That uncertainty was its own kind of terror. Then the rain came. First a drizzle, then sheets of water hammering the wooden roof of the outpost. The steady rhythm of the drops masked other noises, making the night even more treacherous. Wind howled through the trees, bending branches until they groaned like voices in the dark. The cold gnawed at Daniel's fingers, but he refused to loosen his grip on the rifle. He knew the weather would not stop the enemy. If anything, it would give them cover. The setting itself felt like a battlefield before the battle. Nature and war blended into one. A storm above, shadows below, and death waiting in between. Each lightning strike lit the jungle for a heartbeat, daring him to spot the shapes moving just beyond the treeline. Daniel could feel it. The enemy was out there, watching, waiting. The night was building to something inevitable, something violent. This was not just darkness. It was the silence before the storm. The stage where a lone sniper stood against fate. Threat. The silence around the outpost was no longer calm. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, a silence that warned of something terrible approaching. Private Daniel Cross knew it well. He had survived too many missions not to recognize it. Somewhere beyond the trees, behind the curtain of rain and shadows, the enemy was moving. He couldn't see them, not yet, but he could feel them. They were many, trained, armed with heavy weapons, night vision scopes, and the advantage of numbers. Their mission was clear. Take the hill, seize the outpost, and break the line of defense. If they succeeded, the entire front would collapse. Daniel understood this with brutal clarity. If this position fell, countless lives behind him would be lost. The weight of that knowledge pressed harder than the rifle in his hands. Through the storm he caught fragments of sound. The crunch of boots on wet soil, the metallic click of rifles being loaded, the faint whisper of men communicating in the dark. Shadows seemed to shift between the trees. Sometimes lightning split the sky, and for a fraction of a second the jungle lit up. In that flash, he thought he saw silhouettes moving, bodies crouching low, weapons glinting. Then the darkness swallowed them again. The rain intensified, pounding the roof of the outpost, masking the enemy's movements. The storm was their cover, and it was working. Daniel knew they were drawing closer, step by step, preparing for the final surge. The real battle hadn't started yet, but the war of nerves already had. Every sense in his body screamed that the attack was imminent. His finger tightened on the trigger. His breathing slowed. Inside his chest, his heart whispered the vow he had made long before. If they come, I will be ready. One bullet at a time, I'll break them, even if it costs me everything. The night was no longer just dark. It was the edge of war itself. Conflict. The night was at its darkest. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and the air heavy with dampness. Private Daniel Cross knew the moment had come. The jungle no longer whispered with distant sounds. It roared with the approach of boots and hushed commands. Then he saw it. Thin beams of light cutting through the trees. Enemy flashlights. The storm had delivered them to his doorstep. The first shadow broke cover. Daniel didn't hesitate. His finger squeezed the trigger, and the rifle cracked like thunder. The soldier dropped instantly. For a heartbeat, silence returned. Then chaos erupted. Shouts rang out. Bullets tore into the night. Sparks flashed as rounds struck stone and wood. But Daniel stayed steady. Every shot he took was deliberate, precise, final. Each time his rifle barked, another man fell. The enemy panicked, unsure of what they were facing. To them, it felt like an entire squad was entrenched on the hill, raining death from above. But it was just one man, one rifle, one heartbeat at a time. Yet the fight was brutal. The enemy began to spread out, circling the outpost, firing blindly into the darkness. Bullets ripped through the air, splintering wood, sending shards of stone flying. The sound was deafening. Rifle fire, shouting, the metallic clatter of weapons being reloaded. Daniel's shoulder throbbed from a grazing wound, and exhaustion tugged at his muscles. But his focus never wavered. This was no longer a simple exchange of fire. It was a battle of nerves, of endurance, of willpower. The enemy had numbers, but Daniel had resolve. He fought with the calm fury of a man who had already accepted his fate. He knew he might not leave this outpost alive. But every bullet he fired carried with it a message. This ground will not be taken without blood.
Climax. The battle had reached its breaking point. Bullets rained from every direction, hammering the outpost like a storm of steel. Explosions shook the ground, sending showers of dirt and stone into the air. Lightning ripped across the sky, and for an instant the hilltop glowed white, revealing Private Daniel Cross, drenched in sweat and blood, yet unshaken. The enemy was closing in. They darted from rock to tree, pushing forward in waves. Each time a head rose above cover, Daniel's rifle cracked and another soldier fell. Still, they kept coming. To the enemy, it felt impossible. How could one position hold so strong against so many? They still believed there must be an entire unit hidden in the outpost. They didn't know the truth. It was just one man standing alone. Then came the final assault. Dozens surged at once, machine guns blazing, grenades flashing through the night. A blast ripped through the side wall of the outpost, filling the air with smoke and dust. Bullets tore so close to Daniel that sparks flew from the stone at his feet. He was bleeding badly now, his arms slick with crimson, pain burning through his body. Yet in his eyes there was no fear, only a strange, calm certainty. He knew this might be his last stand. He shouldered the rifle one more time, steady as ever, and fired. One shot, then another and another. Each round cut through the storm, dropping soldiers mid-charge, breaking their momentum. The enemy faltered. Their advance slowed, their confidence shattered. They began to realize the impossible, that a single man had held them back. This was the climax, the turning point of the night. On that lonely hill, Daniel Cross, battered and bleeding, forced an army to retreat. He had become more than a soldier. In that moment, he was the line between victory and defeat.
Ending. The battlefield had gone silent. The jungle, moments ago alive with gunfire and explosions, now stood still, heavy with smoke and death. Around the outpost lay the bodies of fallen enemies, dozens scattered across the mud and broken earth. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, filled with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Private Daniel Cross leaned against the shattered wall of the outpost. Blood streamed from his arm and shoulder, soaking into his uniform. His breaths came slow and heavy, each one a struggle. Yet his face carried not fear, but peace. His rifle rested beside him, as if it were a part of him still, loyal to the very end. He knew the truth. The ground had not been lost. The outpost still stood. Then came the sound of engines in the distance, the rumble of armored vehicles and the voices of friendly troops. Reinforcements had finally arrived. When his fellow soldiers climbed the hill, they stopped in awe. They saw the devastation, the silence, and the single figure who had held it all together. Some say Daniel was still alive when they reached him, his lips curling into a faint smile. With his last breath, he whispered, "The outpost is safe. The homeland is safe." And then his eyes closed forever. Others believe he survived, rescued just in time, and fought again on other battlefields. But no matter which story was true, that night became legend. His stand was retold in hushed tones around campfires, in mess halls, and later in history books. He was no longer just Private Daniel Cross. He was the lone sniper who turned back an army, the unknown hero who proved that sometimes one man's courage is stronger than an enemy's numbers. This was not just an ending. It was a legacy, a memory carved into the soul of every soldier who followed.